You have fallen into Event Horizon with John Michael Godier. Today's video is sponsored by Grammarly. With Grammarly's digital writing assistant, you can save time and work more efficiently. Grammarly works across a number of platforms and devices, including a web editor, native desktop app, iPad app, browser extension, and more. On Event Horizon, we use Grammarly every day to help with our scripts, emails, and research material.
I use it to write your lines.
Oh, do you?
On-screen typing. I sure do. Wait, why am I saying what you're typing? Am I a John bot?
Anyway, if you're working from home and need to communicate effectively, Grammarly has a free version with grammar and spelling suggestions, but by upgrading to Grammarly Premium, you'll save time with the advanced features, whilst ensuring your writing is both professional and compelling. Their clarity suggestions help you get straight to the point, and their vocabulary suggestions replace your overused words with more exciting and effective ones. Save time on your work and emails with Grammarly. Go to grammarly.com/Event Horizon to sign up for a free account and get 20% off Grammarly Premium today to help you save time and work more efficiently. In today's episode, John is joined by Matt Williams. Matt Williams is the curator of Universe Today's Guide to Space. He is also a freelance writer, a science fiction author, and a Taekwondo instructor. He is the author of The Cronian Incident and the Jovian Manifesto.
Would you, Matt Williams, go to low Earth orbit, the moon, or Mars if given the chance?
Yeah, I would. Now that's contingent on me being able to come back, right? One thing, Mars, given how long it would take to get there and back, I have my doubts. It's like that's easily a 2.5-year trip, right? And you don't get to spend that much time out there on the surface. It'd be like a reconnoiter kind of thing, and then now we got to go back now. Back on board the ship, we got 9 months of space travel ahead of us. In theory, I absolutely would take an invitation for a return trip, and the moon and orbit are rather brief trips, so absolutely, yeah.
I would not, if for no other reason. It looks like something that would make me car sick. So,
oh yeah.
Now, this is only a part of the great space race that's unfolding right now. We also have, number one, many countries all involved in space, but that's been the case for a long time. Everybody's got some sort of, involvement in space. Collaborative involvement in space. But we have sort of an elephant in the room, and it's starting to look like 1960 again, in that China is very aggressively pursuing space exploration on their terms in competition with the United States, seemingly. And we seem to have another international space race starting up. Mm-hmm. Where do you see this going?
Well, glad you asked, because the last few months now, there's been a few developments that have had me feeling a little nervous. Because one sort of positive note was the Artemis Accords. When those were released, and they were saying we want to reaffirm our commitment to the Outer Space Treaty, we want to do this, transparently, sustainably. That seemed like good news, especially in an environment where you had acts being passed in Congress or executive orders which were saying, go nuts, commercial entities, right? To go mine, go take resources, and they're yours, nothing to worry about. Yeah, I thought if we are going to do the whole return to the moon to stay and expand beyond that, then it can't be a space race 2.0. It needs to be something where multiple space players are doing their thing, and there's competition, but not in the sense of we're enemies or opponents or adversaries. Yeah, that's sort of one of the defining things of space exploration in recent years is that there's more players and more cooperation. And to hear that, that Russia, they flat out said, we're not signing the Artemis Accords because it's tied to an American program, and it's basically accepting that by signing this, you're committing to this legal framework, which everyone agrees with, but the primary focus is on your exploration program, and why would we want to do that when we can do our own? And they signed on with China and said, we are now going to work with them instead of working with NASA to develop the gateway or a base on the moon. We're going to, China and Russia are going to work jointly in order to build a competing base. And I thought, well, that's not good news. Because if we do go back separately, we will have a situation where, yes, there's territorial boundaries. And there's plenty of stuff in the Artemis document there, like the establishment of safe zones. Yeah, Russia they even put it plainly. They said, we need a more international framework, something that's not by you, ultimately for you. And given that up until the last few years, China and Russia were both speaking to NASA and the European Space Agency about going in on an international moon base or the Lunar Gateway. So this seemed like a less than positive development, right? And it could have repercussions.
Yes, it could, and it could lead to sort of a sad situation where we end up with Space NATO versus, as some analog of the Warsaw Pact, back in the day.
Yeah.
And we end up with a split space exploration where we can't even go into space and just be the humans instead of, the United States or Russia or China.
Yeah.
Now, with Russia, what is their own program look like? I mean, are they pursuing like any sort of exploration of the moon or Mars on their own with boots? I know that they periodically they come up with robotic missions and things like that, but do they intend to go in with China and head to Mars?
There's very little information that's readily available on that, and that's sort of one of the stumbling blocks. It's hard to get an accurate picture of what Russia and China are planning because, they don't have that kind of transparency with countries like ours. They keep those cards closer to their chest. But yes, both have committed to lunar exploration in the form of putting boots on the ground by the 2020s and 2030s. Yeah, Russia, I believe, did say in the past, the United States, NASA, they can have Mars. They want to do it by 2030, fine, whatever. And that was last decade there, and it was at a time when NASA was still primarily focused on getting to Mars by way of the moon. They also said that, by 2040 to 2060, we also plan to send astronauts onto Mars. But the first step for them was definitely sending them to the moon. And that included the construction of outposts on the moon. So China in particular, their Chang'e programs, their lunar rovers and sample return missions. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly there. Based on how it's spelled, I believe it's Chang'e. You know what missions I'm referring to.
Yes, absolutely. And now their Mars rover.
Yeah. Oh, yes. I'd love to talk about that one there in a sec. Yeah, but the focus of Chinese lunar program, it was about scouting out resources, learning more about the moon, yes, but scouting out resources in the local environment in terms of metals and silicates and water ice, so that they can build an outpost in the southern polar region, just like NASA's got planned, just like European Space Agency has planned, and like Russia has planned too. And at this point, it seems pretty clear. Russia and China are pursuing a bilateral thing where they go together and build their bases in the South Pole, Aitken Basin, that are, on the other side of the fence there from the European Space Agency's Moon Village and NASA's Artemis Base Camp. So that, again, not very encouraging.
No, it's not. And it's we're in danger of turning the moon into Antarctica.
Mhm.
This sort of ambiguity of claims and not really claims, and bases that don't really work together, and
Yeah.
all these sorts of things that happened with that continent. And it shouldn't, because for a long time in the 90s, everybody was working together, and it looked like, well, maybe we could, make this sort of a unifying thing, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen now. Now, I do worry about things like the militarization of space, stepping further than just exploration and actually getting into militarization. Now, I know that cat is already out of the bag. The moment somebody launched a spy satellite, it was, but it could get so much worse. And so do you think that we could end up in a situation where nation states are using lunar colonies and things like that, and spying on each other's colony, and even sabotage? Do you think it could go that route if we don't put the skids on it?
Yes, absolutely. That is what is generally feared, that we are going to have competing bases and colonies, and that they are, of course, all the scientific personnel we send to space, they're going to be vulnerable because of the tensions we're experiencing here on Earth. And it's fertile ground for fiction, right? And something I definitely want to write about it at some point. Just basically, like, what would that look like and so forth. But it is the future we want to avoid, and the only way to do that is to get everybody at the table and reaffirm the commitment to the Outer Space Treaty, and come up with other evolving legislation as we move forward there. And there's plenty of people who are looking into that, like the Space Court Foundation and the Space Generation Advisory Council. I had the privilege of talking to them again recently, and they just released a document, the Lunar Governance Report, they called it, and the Lunar Manifesto, which is sort of a short form call to action piece. And that's exactly what they were saying. It's like, we need the young people today who are going to inherit this future. Yeah, they need to be getting in now on the ground floor and saying, these are the rules and this is the framework we want, because otherwise, just designating territories and so forth, that nobody is going to benefit from that in the long term. And the potential for harm goes up exponentially.
There's one other thing that I want to talk about regarding China, where there actually is cooperation still, and that is in other, areas of science. And one of those is China and its gigantic radio telescope. Now, we lost Arecibo, sadly, but gained globally an instrument that's, amazing. And Chinese scientists started releasing papers regarding using it for SETI. So that seems to be on their agenda, and it seems they're going to let Western astronomers use time on this telescope. So do you think that hopefully, if not space, you can still do scientific cooperation with things like radio astronomy? Do you think that's really what we should focus on, and sort of push the space community into emulating that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a good point there, and I was hoping we'd sort of get around to that, because it's always a very good counterpoint when anyone is ever talking about the militarization of space or worries about competitions in space. And it's like, even at the height of the Cold War, there was still a spirit of, we're all in this together, right? The Apollo program, they declared we came for all mankind, and that's practically out of the Outer Space Treaty. And that too, I'm astounded that governments back in 1967, they had the intelligence and foresight to sign a document that said nobody gets to claim space, and nobody's going to go be testing nukes out there. Thank you very much. It's like, this made a ridiculous amount of sense, and we've seen with the ISS program. And even before that, the Space Shuttle Mir, it's that space has a way of making us work together, mainly because, well, we're all looking for the same thing there. Yeah, and so much has been said about the overview effect. You can't go into space, look down on Earth as the massive single entity it is, and still believe in things like national appropriation, or this is ours, and we got to make sure there's no spaceship gap or space plane gap or whatever. So that's always an encouraging thing, is that that spirit, that feeling is there. And the fact that Russia, when they were objecting to the Artemis Accords, they cited the International Space Station as an example. We want more of that. That to me was encouraging. It's like we can avoid this, and one of the beauty parts is that the ball is in sort of all our courts for that there. So yeah, maybe let's reach beyond what we've got right now and figure out something that we can all be happy with.
Now, do you think in China's decision to send a rover to Mars, do you think they perceived a Mars rover gap? And do you think that worked into their thinking?
It's interesting. Well, I think in a way, yeah, they're looking at it in terms of the overall space exploration gap, because you look at what the Chinese National Space Agency is doing. It's like they are trying to accomplish on their own what everyone else, all the other major space players, have already done. So the development of the Long March 5, just making sure that they've got their own domestic heavy launch capability, and they're also looking into making their launch March rockets partially reusable. They're working on space planes. They even recently they had a little animation there that they were showing at a big space conference there that looked remarkably like the Starship. And they were saying that and space planes, these are two reusable concepts we're going to be pursuing for all kinds of commercial transport and so forth ideas. And yeah, it was obvious who they were emulating there. They basically want, from the public to the private sector, to catch up to what we've seen from Russia, from Europe, from certainly NASA in the United States. Yeah, sending a Martian rover was definitely part of that thinking. I think they figured that with all the missions exploring Mars and all those the discoveries that are possible, Russia, they started doing that a long time ago. They're not really there in force right now. I don't believe there's any operational Russian missions on Mars right now. But there are several NASA missions, there are European missions, there will be more of both in the future. And India is joining in there. They're Mongolian orbiter.
Yep.
That made it there.
And,
yeah, and how it established orbit on the first try. That was a rather potent demonstration of just how far India's come in the space sector. So yeah, I'd say they definitely want to perceive this as, if we can send something there, then it signals to everyone that we're not being left behind anywhere. And yeah, the other day I was writing about their Zhurong rover, which it's deployed out into the surface now. It's driven around a few times, and what was really impressive was that that's part of the Tianwen-1 mission. And that mission is an orbiter, a lander, and a rover, and China sent all three together on their first Mars mission. Nobody else has done that.
Well, yeah, they definitely, that was a landmark, because, I mean, look at the history of the United States losing landers and Russia losing just everything at Mars. They had such great luck at Venus, but not Mars. And yet China does it on the first try. Although, in fairness, that rover does look rather familiar. So they're...
Oh, yeah. And it's interesting from, I guess, a cultural or historical point of view, because I'm not sure if I've ever mentioned this, but my official education there, my background is in history. And if there was one thing that Russia, the Soviets did throughout the Cold War, and what China is doing now, it's there was always this idea of catch up and overtake the West. And in so doing, it's like, well, we're emulating what they have there. So, they've got all of this industry and hydroelectric dams and the automotive sector and so forth. Well, we're gonna build it up, and yeah, they've got launch vehicles that are adapting from the Nazi rockets. Yeah, we're gonna do that. We're gonna do it, and we're gonna do it faster and first. And again, the way with China, how they were adapting designs from SpaceX. It's like we're gonna look where the innovation is happening. We're gonna take that and we're going to make our own. And yeah, the Soviets did it even as late as the Buran program. I mean, it was practically a carbon copy of the space shuttle. And I think the fact that it never really became operational is why there are people who think that, it would have been better than the space shuttle.
Well, and also, I mean, that has a long history, because just after World War II, Russia started copying U.S. bombers that they had been loaned for the war from the United States. So they just copied the technology, back engineered it. But there's also something to be said that in another way, they're simply saving work by taking the basics and, adapting it to their use. Now, that's the next question, is this Mars rover.
Yeah.
How does this differ as far as the science package goes from the US's rovers active on Mars? Is there something there that, I guess what I'm saying is, are they repeating anything, or is this new stuff?
I'd say they're definitely repeating, and I've got a list of its instruments here, so if you give me 1 second, I can actually give a slightly detailed take. So yeah, it's scientific package, right? It's suite of instruments there. It's got a two types of cameras. One is a radiometer camera, so it looks at light in multiple wavelengths and to get a sense of the radiation environment. Then it's got a high resolution camera for taking pictures of the surface. The only thing that's different there, otherwise it's got instruments there for studying the composition of Martian soil and seeking out different kinds of minerals and indications of past water. And of course, and a spectrometer that's going to indicate the chemical makeup there of soil samples that it's taking. One thing that sets it apart, the only instrument that, as far as I know, sets it apart is the ground penetrating radar. It's got a radar on it there that can sense what's underground up to a depth of 100 meters. And the purpose of that is specifically to look for sources of water deep underground. And yeah, it's. I mean, there's a reason they sent it to Utopia Planitia. It's like this northern region there. It's low-lying, an ocean covered it at one time, and we're pretty sure that Mars water escaped underground. So, can you find it? Yeah. That there is something that's going to be very important in the coming years, and NASA's dedicated all kinds of resources to finding underground water there too. I do not believe that Spirit, Opportunity, Curiosity, or Perseverance had a ground-penetrating radar on the rover.
No, that's always been sort of on the wish list. 100 meters depth?
Yeah.
And I mean, that's Aquaverse, But at the same time, I can imagine a ground-penetrating radar like that would reveal a whole lot about Martian geology, because you, I guess, would be able to differentiate layers. And what of meteorites? Because we find iron meteorites on the surface of Mars. The rovers have done it. And they don't rust away, they just sit there. And as a result, you've got chunks of iron in that mix too, which might actually even confound the radar. So it'll be interesting to see if they tell us. Yeah. China's under no obligation to tell us anything, but I'm sure they will publish papers. Their scientists do. And I'd be interested to see what they get from that ground penetrating radar.
Oh yes, me too. And well, in terms of the Martian surface, right? It's funny that way. It's like it's dynamic, but it's not dynamic. All those ancient features are still there. They haven't been, whittled down by wind or rain, but it still has dust storms and things shift around. So yeah, it's like there's most likely a lot of meteorites that landed there in the past and got just sort of buried over.
Well, it certainly happened here. I remember an estimate that was done. This is probably very old information done in the 1980s, but it was estimated that within the topsoil, there are 2 meteorites per, large meteorites per square mile across the entire surface of the Earth. And if you knew exactly where to dig, you would find a weathering meteorite. So, because they're falling constantly, and they have been since the beginning of the solar system. So those types of things get preserved on the Moon and Mars. And I know that in one of the lunar samples, soil samples from Apollo, they found a small carbonaceous chondrite meteorite in it. So we've actually recovered a meteorite from the surface of the moon and brought it back to Earth. Now, the U.S. rovers, which seems like a good place to end up on. Perseverance and its amazing helicopter.
Yes.
The ultimate goal is a sample return from Mars.
Yes.
And to sort of collect them up with the rover and then work up a way to get them back here in the future. How is that coming along? Does it look like we will actually be able to return those samples?
Well, yeah, that plan has evolved a lot in the last few years. I do believe so. Now, I can recall back when NASA was still betting on the journey to Mars. They believed that, Perseverance, or they were calling it the 2020 lander at the time, it's going to get there, it's going to grab some samples, it's going to put them in a cache, and when we send a crewed mission there in the 2030s, they're going to pick it up and bring it home. Rather exciting prospect and a nice way to, make some overlap there between robotic and human exploration. But in recent years, the plans evolved, and I think it is because of delays and the uncertainty about when a crewed Martian mission is actually going to happen. And so they have a plan to send a lander with a rover that is then going to grab the samples, bring it back to the lander. The lander is going to have a little launch rocket mated to it. That's going to send the samples into orbit, where a European Space Agency retrieval orbiter is going to pick it up and bring it home. Yeah, so there's 4 elements in total to that mission. NASA and the European Space Agency have sort of divvied it up between them. And I think ultimately NASA's got 2 of the 4, and the European Space Agency has the other 2. It will be a few years before that is ready and up and running. Right? There's a lot of developmental stuff that needs to happen still, but I think the concept is sound, and they've certainly come a long way with it there. It's like just looking at it in terms of what would it take for a robotic mission to pick those up and bring it back, and what are all the elements that we need, and okay, great, now who wants what here? Who wants to build what? So yeah, I think that hopefully in this decade I believe 2026 is the target date for mounting that mission. And yeah, I think that with a little luck, they will be ready to go by that point.
Any idea what the capacity of the sample will be? How big it would be?
Not numbers, but the launch vehicle itself, let's say possibly a few pounds, I think, or like 2 kilos. I'll have to get back to you on that, though. It's we're talking beyond the gram range. I'm not sure actually that it would be in the kilogram range, but yeah, definitely high gram range, I'd say.
I hope the rock they get is sedimentary and water altered, and maybe we can look for fossil microbes inside of it. So that's what I'm hoping for, because we already have Martian basalts. They follow as Martian meteorites, and we know what volcanic rock is, and we already know what the makeup of the Martian atmosphere is. So I'm hoping for sedimentary stuff if they can find it.
Yeah. In fact, actually, I am looking at. I'm trying to find a reference to their ascent rocket there, and it doesn't say how much, but just samples, multiple samples.
Well, in any case, anything is better than nothing.
Yeah.
But I wonder what kind of isolation they'll do with them, because, it's still, sort of an open question as to, if there could be anything. You remember the labeled release experiment that detected, something in the 1970s and all that. So I think they would probably want to take a very close look to make sure that this is sterile, and that there isn't any super microbes or anything in there, which is also another concern. If you go to Mars and found a Mars colony privately, are you going to check first to make sure there's nothing there, Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
I hope they do, or else we'll be seeing the Andromeda strain unfolding on the surface of Mars in a colony.
Yeah.
Now, Matt, tell us about your current projects, what you're doing, and what you got going on.
Well, there's a couple right now. Myself and some colleagues we are working on a book that takes a look at the Fermi paradox, and hopefully we're hoping to break some new ground on that there, rather than just looking at possible resolutions to the paradox, but looking beyond it. However, that's going to be about a year at this point there before that can really come around, and we're hoping to do some podcasts in the meantime where we talk about it. But right now, what's happening is recently, through Mars City Design, where I'm the director of media communication, their CEO and I, Vera Muliani, we produced a series of podcasts about living on Mars. And it's just been released. It's called the Martian Dispatches, and it's the first volume that's been released. We plan to have multiple volumes made available over time. And especially exciting news that happened recently was she was in talks with the Space Channel, and they decided to pick them up. And they're going to present the individual episodes once a week for the foreseeable future. No indication yet on when they're going to start doing that, but we're in the works for 12 episodes, and yes, each one is a narration from a future Martian citizen who's describing what life on Mars looks like about 100 years after the first humans set foot there.
That sounds fantastic. Maybe you should include an alien perspective of the alien discovering Mars inhabited, but Earth isn't any longer. And the alien getting all sort of, wonder how that happened.
Yeah.
All right. It's good to talk to you again, Matt, and we'll talk again sometime soon and catch up on space news.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. And that name again is Martian Dispatches.
Thanks for listening. I am futurist and science fiction author.
Wrong channel.
No, it's not. Thanks for listening. I am futurist and science fiction author John Michael Gauthier, currently hosting Event Horizon and wondering where Anna actually came from. One day I had a tablet computer, the next I had a boss. Very disturbing, and be sure...
And that's enough of that.
YouTuber forever! Like, subscribe, and hit the bell!
Sell out.
What?